And this 6G stuff, it's quite interesting because it's conceivable that, what most analysts I've spoken to in the semiconductor space seem to think is that China at the moment, and this is no secret, is trying to become more independent in terms of technology. So it doesn't need to have access to US-made equipment and tools. But this is a process that's going to take time. It's not something you can just do overnight. A lot of this stuff is really hard to develop. So it's going to take a few years. But China plays the long game. A few years. If Huawei can survive in some slightly different shape or form, not really selling a lot of 5G.
It's got 2/3 of the domestic networking market,
it's still got the domestic networking market.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. Still quite nice weather here in mid-September. UK might even have a Barbie tomorrow.
Wow, who would have thought?
Which normally means I go to Costco and get 12 different kinds of sausage and then end up eating it for the rest of the week.
Are you one of these people when you do a barbecue you have I
cook too
loads
much.
We always, you would never normally sit down for a meal and have chicken and a burger and a sausage
and
all
lamb
in the same
chops
plate.
And
you just think that's excessive, but for some reason with the barbecue it's acceptable. It's like drinking at an airport at 9 a.m.
Well, it's like it takes you about 15 minutes to fire it up. You think, well, no, I've done that.
Yeah.
I might as well.
It doesn't take 15 minutes to turn on the cooker, does it?
No.
But yes, no, I overdo it.
And they've got meat in your fridge for days.
Yeah, which there's worse things.
True.
And it was fun. Last week's podcast was fun with Mary.
It was, yeah.
She looked back on it. I think she's a bit worried that she might have sort of said some shit she regretted, but she looked back on it and she
was happy.
She's happy.
It's because you'll edit all that stuff out then, isn't it?
Good thing I edited out the bit where she got drunk and trashed the studio.
Had to rebuild.
And Richard Fogg got name checked in it for being an enabler, and he picked up on that on Twitter as well.
Yeah.
So that was all good. Hopefully, we know, unless something goes on, we've got Danielle coming up. Hopefully we've got some other guests coming up. Mm-hmm. I know that people are going to hear this now, and I'm going to get the PRs going. I'd like my client to come on and talk about their commercial interests. Just don't fucking bother. That's not going to happen. The people we have on are people we know we're going to have a good chat with. Yeah. If that happens to coincide, I'm not going to lie, Mary got in a couple of plugs for stuff she's been involved with professionally, that's fine, but just make it a good laugh.
Yeah.
What we don't want is some CEO in a suit and tie just basically regurgitating a press release on the pod. That's just not going to work, is it?
No. Not unless it's a CEO of Vodafone.
Well, even then.
No, we don't want him regurgitating a press release, but we could ask him tough questions, couldn't we?
I suppose so, but that's not. This isn't an adversarial pod, is it?
I know it isn't. Yeah,
get him drunk.
We could. Well, even that would probably get quite a lot of hits, I imagine.
Yeah, Jamie, get a whole group CEO on and let us get him pissed. Okay.
Maybe I should start building a whole bar here.
I know.
Shaker.
Well, I think I'm sort of partly inspired by Rogan because he's normally got something on the go, and we've yet to have a spliff on the pod. But given that it's still illegal in this country,
you were compared to Joe Rogan this week.
You what?
You were compared to Joe Rogan.
Was I? By what? At the drinks you went to?
So I went to a drinks deal with Huawei.
My ego just went up there.
And I was chatting to Cheryl, who was saying that she watches the podcast quite a lot.
Right.
And I think it was Cheryl. It was either Cheryl or one of her colleagues who was with her. I lose track because it was at the stage of the evening.
Yeah.
But someone from the PR team at Huawei definitely sort of said, yeah, Scott's it's a bit like, the setup of it is a bit like Joe Rogan. And I said, he really likes Joe Rogan, he'd be pleased to hear that.
Yeah, as does Pierre. Yeah. We're both inspired by him.
I've been a bit, no, I don't know, never mind. Just lately, he's been like...
You think Rogan?
Yeah, since he moved, it's been a bit of a downhill.
What, you think he's been a bit straight, do you?
Since he moved both virtually to Spotify and physically
to Austin.
Yeah, it's not the same anymore. You think he's
lacking a bit of spark, do you?
Yeah. Well, did you keep talking about COVID all the time? I just get bored of it.
Is that all he's talking about?
He talks too much.
Or he'll get some other rando on one of his pet things like that. That one goes on about nutritional supplements, but I find those a bit boring. I can't do 3 hours of nutritional supplements.
No, me neither. Yeah.
The whole world is talking about COVID there all the time, so I suppose he's not unique in that. But.
Anyway, no offence, Joe. I'll still come on. So you can go, here's Scott, who no one gives a shit about. Let's have a chat, Scott.
Talk about your book.
Yeah, well, quite. That's my daydream. Can you imagine?
And talk about Huawei.
Let's go. I'll tell you what, if I go on Rogan and talk about my book, then you can safely assume the beers are on me indefinitely.
Yeah.
But I think that's a little way away, given that no one's buying it at all.
Oh,
I know. Thanks, everyone. I would have thought some of you guys would. What's going on? All right, let's get to the point. What have we been writing about this week? The most read story on Telecoms.com was one I wrote that the headline was Huawei publishes a book on 6G. It's a bit of journalism, really, because I didn't see the book on 6G. And the first reporting of it, I think, was in Chinese language on their own, they've got their own internal internet or something. You know, China's got its own internet, full stop.
Yeah.
Well, Huawei's got its own internet within that. And that was all in Chinese, and I couldn't get Google Translate to handle it. And even if it can, Google Translate on Chinese is sketchy at the
And you
best
don't
of
want to
times.
read a whole book written by Huawei on 6G, presumably.
No offence, Huawei, but, you know.
not from anybody.
Yeah.
That would
you
be
know.
above and beyond the...
Joe Rogan
routine
wrote a
sort
book
of
on
thing.
6G. I wouldn't read that. But yes, we'll talk about that. I'm keep doing my jumping the gun thing, don't I? So we can talk about that, and we might overlap that with Ian. You went and had some drinks with Huawei, and I was meant to go,
I did.
but I double booked. Sorry again, Cheryl. And I couldn't get out of the thing I double booked on. So I'll just have to hear about it from you.
Yeah.
Then we're going to move on. We both covered it, but you in a much more comprehensive way. A thing I'm sure we chatted about on previous pods where Nokia felt they had to bail on the ORAN alliance because they were worried about getting trouble with the Americans for talking to Chinese people, because it's become so ridiculous now.
Yeah.
They can't even hang out.
Yeah.
They can't even go and get some noodles together or something.
Uh-huh.
Or whatever the Finnish equivalent of that is, some pickled herring.
Not inside the ORAN alliance anyway. They can in the 3GPP.
Yes, well, quite.
Well, now they can, though, apparently. Anyway, we jumped
yeah.
the gun
So,
here,
and you even got some scoopage there.
Yeah.
So we'll get into that, and then I think we're going to finish off. I mean, I still
Finish off.
Yeah.
Sorry. But it's...
I think we'll finish off Nokia. Actually, in keeping with the sort of the sort of geopolitical theme, there's been a couple of stories. One I was just finishing off writing just before sending the newsletter, just about the sort of confluence, the overlap of politics and big tech seems to be ramping up.
Yeah.
And we can discuss how desirable that is. I think you can guess what my position might be on it. That's that. And just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on YouTube or on Facebook, you can also listen to it on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and loads of other podcasting platforms. Cool. We all right? You're poking technical things. You're
Just
making me worry.
He's pushing his box again.
So the Huawei thing. So they teased a book that's being published by Huawei on 6G.
Who wrote it, Huawei? Bunch of people.
I don't think I even noted it. I mean, it was teased by the rotating chairman or whatever.
Written by
Eric
Huawei.
Xu.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce these things.
Well, he's pretty well. But
he didn't actually write
at
it. He's just the one who sort of flagged it up. About a couple of their senior techies. He's quoted as saying, Huawei will define 5.5G and research 6G. I hate these decimal points of Gs.
So do I.
Yeah, anyway.
That's rubbish.
He had
It's
to
either
go and do
6G or nothing. You can't say we're doing what?
I know.
6G
To me, that makes it sound like 6G is going to be rubbish, even saying that, because then you start to think,
It's just an
it's just an incremental thing. I mean, what they should be saying is, forget about 5.5G. We're gonna define the 6G standard, and we're going to be the people who make all the money from it, and everybody else is going to be rubbish.
And even if we concede that over a 10-year period there's obviously going to be incremental progress, so maybe there's some argument for 5.5G. Once the marketers start getting hold of 5.75 and 5.9G, then I just get tense.
Yeah, 5.9 recurring is the one I'm really looking forward to.
Exactly. Well, normally you only have to get to about 5.7 before the Americans start going, fuck it, 6G.
Yeah. And then no one gives a shit when 6G does come along.
Yeah, because they've just
they've already shot
such
their
a
bolt.
false start of about 2 or 3 years.
Well, what's the difference between gigabit LTE and the average speed of 5G we get here? It's not...
Good question. In fact, probably on
That's a good
gigabit
point.
LTE you can get higher speeds than on average 5G here, because it's all on low band spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's not all on, but
so like for example, T-Mobile in the US is making all these big claims about 5G, but it's lobbing it out over a tiny amount of 600 megahertz spectrum. And again, this is a massive dumbing down, and feel free to correct me, Ian, but largely 5G, there's nothing intrinsic in 5G that makes it faster. There's just some cleverness that allows it to use fatter pipes, more spectrum. But if you're only using 5 megahertz of spectrum, you're not necessarily getting any speed advantage at all, are you?
No, it's better to have a decent 4G service on mid-band spectrum than 600 megahertz 5G, which is why some of the 5G speeds are actually quite disappointing compared to what they were being pitched as before it came along. But.
So anyway, Huawei's going, whatever. We're talking about 6G already. And so the quote is, Huawei will define 5G and research 6G at the same time in the next few years. And it is a test of the whole industry's imagination and creativity whether 6G can surpass 5G and 5G or whatever, which, I mean, if it can't surpass it, then what's the fucking point? But anyway, he's quoted as writing, this is all channelized. Something may have been lost in translation. And it was channelized, and I had to get it from Global Times, which is state-owned Chinese press, so you've always got to take that with a pinch of salt. And then, so tellingly, a Global Times piece then bangs on about what a great job Huawei has done of handling all the stuff the US has thrown at it. So this is where it also got interesting, is why is Huawei writing a book about 6G now?
Yeah.
When it put a date, it said it reckons it will be ready to go at 2030. So we're 2021. Yeah. Why is it writing a book about it in 9 years in advance? So the real reason it has to be this broader geopolitical stuff. And I think Huawei's basically saying two things. Firstly, it's saying business as usual. You've thrown all this shit at us. We're fine.
Yeah.
We're still getting on with it. We're still cracking on. We're good. Is that all you got, America, sort of thing. And then it's also sort of setting up the whole sort of standard fork narrative. So they're basically saying, we're going to be cracking with 6G. We're going to be ready to rock with or without you in 2030. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Which I actually think, as a bit of sort of geopolitical chest beating, isn't bad.
Yeah, I think there's more grandstanding now from them on 6G than there was even a couple of years ago, because I think their 5G situation is pretty desperate.
What do you mean? In what sense? Who's they? Huawei's 5G situation?
Huawei's 5G
You mean in terms
situation.
of the work it's getting outside of China?
In terms of the work it's getting outside of... Yeah. I mean, look, what the US has done in terms of sanctions and the entity list stuff, and, which has sort of almost been forgotten about, I think, a little bit in the last few months...
Not by Huawei, I don't think.
And this came out a little bit at the Wednesday night thing I went to. There was a bit of talk about... I mean, one thing that people seem to have forgotten is the big theme for Huawei this year has actually been repositioning. Their smartphone business, I think there's an acknowledgement that that's dying, yeah? Because
largely dead. I mean, if you look at the numbers.
Well, the last big story about them on the smartphones front, which I think Mike Dana reported on a couple of weeks before Reuters started writing about it, was that some of their latest phones will use 4G chips from Qualcomm because they can't get 5G stuff. They'll be 4G phones, right?
Yeah, so they've got the perfect storm of not being able to get the chips and also not being able to use proper Android.
Exactly, and this isn't just a problem for the smartphone business. I mean, I delved into this a few months ago. How important are these very high-end processors, 5 nanometer, 7 nanometer, the kind of stuff you can only get from a couple of places, which they've been cut off from. How important are those, actually, not just for the smartphone business, but for the networks business as well? And the answer is very important. Yeah, you can't have competitive 5G equipment, the high-end massive MIMO stuff that Huawei was always regarded as being the kind of market leader in a few years ago, without access to these cutting-edge processors. Yeah, so whether or not European governments and governments outside China decide to ban Huawei and to make life difficult for it, service providers are going to see they become less competitive. Yeah. And then what's going to happen? You're going to buy stuff from Ericsson and Nokia and Samsung and ZTE even anyway, because they just won't be able to...
Well, I don't think you get it from ZTE, because I think the other problem, I think we've had conversations with...
Well, ZTE, there might be more restrictions.
Yeah, because the other concern, if you're like like Andrea Donna, who I'm hopefully going to chat to next week, who's the UK head of networks at Vodafone.
Yeah, well, he's not going to use it because he's banned from doing it. But
no, but my point is also, without meaning to put words in his mouth, he's going to think, I might not, even if things quieten down, I might just not take the risk.
Yeah, well,
I've got to plan a decade in advance. I've got to have secure supply lines. I've got to make sure there's not going to be some crisis. So that'll be my job, and I'll be out on the street.
But my point is that at the moment they can't get the high end equipment they need, not only for smartphones actually, but also for networks.
Yeah,
and therefore, and this is why all the talk from Huawei at the moment is about things like cars and doing software and doing the cloud. That is where they're seeing the growth. And this 6G stuff, it's quite interesting because it's conceivable that what most analysts I've spoken to in the semiconductor space seem to think is that China at the moment, and this is no secret, is trying to become more independent in terms of technology. So it doesn't need to have access to US made equipment and tools. But this is a process that's going to take time. It's not something you can just do overnight. A lot of this stuff is really hard to develop. So it's going to take a few years. But China plays the long game. A few years. If Huawei can survive in some slightly different shape or form, not really selling a lot of 5G.
It's got 2/3 of the domestic networking market,
it's still got the domestic networking market. That's a curious one because you do kind of wonder what impact lower, sort of less competitive 5G equipment might have there. But then again, there's probably
price controls anyway.
They've probably provided a lot of that stuff anyway, is what I was going to say. A lot of the chips that they'd stockpiled from TSMC, this has already gone out into Chinese networks. I mean, it's not like
I can't imagine there's a unfettered market in Chinese networks right now. It's become so politicized.
Yeah.
I would have thought Xi Jinping's got his beady eye on the whole fucking scenario.
Yeah. But certainly outside China, then it's conceivable that their smartphone business and their networks business really dwindles in European markets to being not very much at all. And therefore it becomes, ever more important for them to make money from China, as well as things like the cloud and software for cars.
Yeah, Xi Jinping will make sure they can.
Yeah. And so basically all they've got to do is do that, be successful. I mean, and to be quite honest with you, most of the money still comes from China anyway. It's ridiculous how much they generate from China. Even when they were still selling loads of stuff to Europe, it was still their biggest market by far. And then let's say in 4 or 5 years' time, China has its own chip making capabilities, and all these worries that are there at the moment about not being able to get access to high-end chips, maybe those aren't a concern anymore. Let's say 26, 27, and then you're going to need this stuff for 6G as well. It's going to be equally important to have that kind of hardware capability for 6G. Yeah. And by this stage, who knows? I mean, we've talked about this before, but maybe we end up in a situation where we don't even have a unified 6G standard.
Well, so that's back to the article. I mean, that's the sort of long and short of it. They didn't say it. There's some stuff. If we take, so the interesting thing about having something like the Global Times, because Xi Jinping, you never see Xi Jinping stand up and talk, do you? He's like the opposite of Donald Trump. He's like the anti-gobshite. But then he's got all these indirect channels. Yeah. And you assume that anything the Global Times puts up, especially if it's an opinion piece, has had sign off pretty far up.
Yeah, he's sort of slightly aloof from it. He's a kind of a sort of figurehead type person who's pulling the strings.
But he's a sort of puppet master. Yeah, that's sort of Machiavellian type. And so I don't think it's unreasonable to take a Global Times opinion piece as the position of the Chinese Communist Party, more or less.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the Global Times piece goes on about, it says, the US, this is quoting from the piece, US ban has hurt Huawei's business to some extent, but has not been able to hurt it fundamentally.
Well, I mean, that's ridiculous.
I know. Well, this is propaganda, isn't it?
Yeah.
But what it does is it tells you what their political direction of travel is, and it's defiance and all that sort of thing, which is fair enough. And then it quoted a supposedly independent analyst called Shang Li Gang, I think. And he goes, quote, backed by China's vast market, to your point, Huawei managed to maintain its capital, staff team and research capabilities, which I believe will empower the company to push forward next generation technologies and reinforce its lead in the global telecoms industry.
I mean, they're just lucky to happen to be, from the market, from a country in the world that is, I mean, it's not lucky because that's part of the reason they're so successful anyway. You come out of a country with 1 billion people and all that access to talent and resources. It's one of the reasons that Chinese companies are so competitive, isn't it? But they have that domestic market that's always going to support them. Whereas if you're a business that's from Ireland, and you're really big on the world stage, you obviously have to be.
Yeah, you can't rely on Ireland.
You can't rely on Ireland
to
do
that. To our Irish cousins.
So, are there any examples actually of Irish companies that are really big on the world stage?
I mean, I'm tempted to talk about booze.
All right, there's Guinness.
I think Diageo owns Guinness.
And so most Guinness is probably sold.
From.
I mean, there's a huge amount of Guinness sold in Africa, for instance. I know.
Jameson's.
Huge
we like a bit Jameson's.
Jameson's are pretty popular in the rest of the world. Yeah.
But anyway, no, I mean, I'm sure there are others. We just haven't done the research. But yes, the point being, their domestic market of 3 million punters, or however many people live in Ireland, they've got to be global.
Yeah.
Whereas China can be completely insular. And I think increasingly the West, as personified by the US, is partly adopting an if you can't beat them, join them approach. I think the US is just fine with a bit of balkanization.
Yeah.
Because they're chucking money at anyone who says they know how to make a chip. They're chucking money at OpenRAN, which we'll get onto in a bit.
Yeah.
But, the reason OpenRAN has become something of a political interest is because it allows autonomy from Huawei.
Yeah.
In their eyes. It just so happens an American company, Intel, is right slap bang in the middle of it as well.
Yeah. Well, this is evident in Europe this week, and this ties in with your story on 6G. All this stuff about the Chips Act, Ursula, whatever her name is.
Yeah, I didn't.
Ursula Andress
I saw you guys covering
that,
but I didn't get around to that.
I mean,
did you write it up or someone else?
No, Ken wrote it up, but I mean, it very much ties in with the stuff that Intel was going on about last. What's his name? What's Intel's new boss called? Former VMware CEO. I'm really annoyed now that I can't remember his name. Gelsinger was in Europe at an automotive show and said he was going to spend 80 billion on 10 European fabs over the next 10 years.
He didn't. I read his bit. He only explicitly spoke about 2 or 3 fabs.
No, he said 10 in his speech. The transcript was on Seeking Alpha.
Oh, yeah. Right. I think I just got it from their press release. Okay, fair enough.
Yeah. So, and I think they've already decided on a couple. I
think that's what it was. There was the hard commitment, and then there was the nice to have commitment.
Yeah.
I think that's the distinction I made. He said we're definitely spending a bill on a couple.
Yeah. But
we could spend up to this amount on this many.
And he was very much kind of riding off the back of this wave of protectionism, really.
Yeah.
His whole speech, if you read it, it's all about Europe's fallen behind in production. It used to be, if you go back to 1996, it used to account for 40% of the world's semiconductor production or something, and now it's down at 9%.
Right.
And obviously there's this European ambition that was published a few months ago to double that, more or less, to go up to 20% in the next.
They're good at publishing ambitions, not so good at fucking doing something.
Yeah, and then as Ursula Andress, or whatever her name is, came striding out of the waves.
If only it was Ursula
with her bikini on, saying we need to basically have like European production capability. And the trouble is that, I mean, the best way for them to do it, actually, I think, is probably to get companies like Intel and TSMC to come over
and do offshoots
and do local, because at least then you don't have this concern.
That's what America's doing with TSMC.
This is exactly what America's doing. Yeah. You don't want all your high-end chips being made in Taiwan, basically, which any day now could get taken over by the Chinese. What you want to have is local production, basically. But to try and do it yourself, this is a thing that's not very clear from this European Chips Act. Are they talking about pumping money into, seeding European businesses to do that? Because that, I think, would be a stupid idea.
Well, also kind of runs contrary to their own rules about protectionism, which is obviously bollocks.
But they're very hypocritical, aren't they?
Well, the EU is a protectionist bloc. What it doesn't like is protectionism within the bloc. Yeah. That's one of the reasons they're so butthurt about Brexit, because now we get to do all that stuff that wasn't allowed before.
Yeah.
Such as...
like having empty shelves in the supermarket.
Oh, hello. He went there.
I have to say, I haven't noticed any.
Oh, I have. I went to a petrol station yesterday. There was hardly any chocolate bars.
I did today as well.
Bloody hell. Well, it's going to end up being like...
I wanted a croissant.
It really is going to end up being like The Walking Dead.
No croissant for the past 3 days.
Well, I think you'll find that when supplies get tight, it's foreign food that gets cut off first.
Obviously,
there's plenty of buns.
Yeah. You can make your own croissants.
And loaves of Hovis.
No? You just roll a bit of pastry up in butter and, turn it into a crescent shape, whack it in the oven.
What they teach you?
To get the layers, it's impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then afterwards you have indigestion for about 3 hours because you put too much butter in.
I would never get indigestion from butter. I'm French.
They have different intestinal situations.
My arteries are pure butter.
Like a bit of burr over there. So yes. So yeah, I think we agree that is all interesting. And yeah, there's just this sort of great game going on. I mean, talking about Europe and talking about France, I can mention another story I wrote this week. It wasn't really a telecom story, but it's so big that it affects everything. So I decided to cover it. And that is headline, China antagonized by AUKUS Pacific Security Pact. So AUKUS, which is an abbreviation of Australia, UK and US. And they basically got together and they went, right, we're going to form a new sort of NATO-ish thing. But just between these three countries. They went, all right, we're going to hang out with these drongos now. The initial thing was that the UK and the US are going to help the Aussies out with some nuclear-powered submarines, which is handy because you can sort of stooge around under the water for much longer, hunt for Red October, all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
No noise.
No noise, that's
Crimson
right.
Tide.
Caterpillar Drive. But it's clearly nowhere in any of the statements was China explicitly mentioned, but it's clearly all about China.
Yeah.
China's been sort of taking over these little islands in the South China Sea, building air bases.
Yeah.
Every now and then it flies some lads over Taiwan just to go, what the fuck are you going to do about it? And, well, here's your answer.
And that's what's driving all the chip stuff, really. But
well, exactly. I mean, it's starting to get a bit worrying because, you got the sort of more sort of passive, weak Western media going, oh, it's a provocation, how could you? The sort of appeasing Neville Chamberlain types.
Yeah.
Going, oh, you're provoking them. What? So we never do anything to provoke them. Meanwhile, they can fly jets over Taiwan and we just got to go, oh, well, they're allowed to.
Well, it's very similar to that era, I think, and I think people who are I mean, there's a perception that people who are sort of tough on China at the moment are overly hawkish, isn't there? And
you can be overly hawkish.
You can be overly hawkish.
I mean, they haven't done anything yet.
I don't think history doesn't look back very kindly, does it, on people who are sort of overly cosy with Nazi Germany
in
the
hindsight,
1930s.
In hindsight, Churchill came out better than Chamberlain.
And to be honest, I don't see any difference between Nazi Germany and China at the moment.
Well,
in terms of I'm not talking about.
You're talking about let's say mid-30s as opposed to 1939.
Mid to late 30s, I think Nazi Germany and China are basically exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, it would depend.
No, I'm not talking about before they'd started, invading other European countries and killing millions of Jews, but they were already. I mean, the Chinese persecute minorities. They persecute dissidents.
Xinjiang.
They're a totalitarian state. They have more surveillance than Nazi Germany ever did. They're exactly the same.
Yeah, so do we. To be fair. Everyone's got more surveillance.
Yeah, well, okay, but everybody always has done that, you could say. But there's a sliding scale.
There's lots of dodgy stuff going on over there, and every now and then someone has a go. Like there was another thing. This is a bit of a tangent. There's some parliamentary group called the We Love China group or something like that, and they invited their top UK diplomat over to get pissed in the House of Parliament or something like that.
Yeah,
and then there's 5 MPs who've had their assets frozen and had sanctions against them by China because they flagged up Xinjiang.
Yeah.
So this is another reason I'm not going to go to China now. I'm talking about Xinjiang. That put me on yet another shit list. And so China went, you're slandering us, you're being out of order, so we're going to retaliate, because that's what they do. Remind me to bring that up again, because that was one of the things that I think made Australia keen on this thing.
But, by the way, Cheryl thinks it's funny that we keep saying we can never go to China again on the podcast.
Sure, I'm not doing it.
Because obviously they would quite like the idea of us at some point being able to go and see.
But you can just imagine. You can just imagine being asked to go in a different lane through the airport.
Yeah.
Next thing you know.
I don't think the reach is that.
I don't know if. Yeah, I mean, I think if I wrote for the Times and I'd written some of the stuff I did, then I'd be.
Well, you were just talking about surveillance state.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're as important as the Times.
Yeah.
But there's no upper limit to the size of a database.
No, I know. Yeah.
I'm pleased you find it funny.
In the 6G book thing that was reported on, was there anything at all in it about what 6G would be? interestingly, or was it just sort of
Yeah, actually,
dominate?
let me just come to that a sec. What was I just being tangent about? Oh yeah, what you're getting a lot with China and the West right now is this stupid thing that everyone's done. I'm not pinning this on China. Everyone's done it throughout history of a game of you started it.
Yeah.
So our MPs moan about Xinjiang, they retaliate against our MPs, and then their lad wants to come up and get pissed in the House of Parliament. Our MPs complain, and then he got banned. And so then they freaked out again, and they said they're going to retaliate, and you just get this really irritating game of retaliation tennis going on.
Yeah.
Which I'm not going to dignify by saying who started it, because that's the very thing I'm criticising. So yes, that's the only thing I wanted to mention there. But yeah, back to your question. I mean, nothing that I saw went into any specifics.
Right.
There was another thing. I've gone away from the story now. There was a company. What are they called?
I mean, I asked Ericsson's CEO even.
Right.
About 6G a few weeks ago, and he was very much sort of positioning it as a way to sort of provide the kind of network foundation, I guess, for artificial intelligence. Really, that was his sort of big sort of. I don't think I'm doing him a disservice by sort of encapsulating his view about it in that way. That it was a sort of the network foundation for things that require very sophisticated levels of artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and if we dumb it down and go, odd number of generations is a starting a new technology, and even number is doing it properly, then maybe they'll just find ways of doing mid-band and millimeter wave better and all that.
And that's
sort
such
of
a bore. I mean, I like him describing it that way. And the University of Surrey, which has done a lot of research in this country, is like quite a leader, actually, I think, in mobile comms. They come out with all these quite wacky use cases about 6G, to do with sensory experiences delivered over a network, which is quite hard to imagine how that would work. But
the metaverse that Zuckerberg likes to bang on about.
But I think, to me, if it just becomes, I mean, maybe we're always going to need faster technologies. We're always going to need things to get.
Yeah, I think it's faster. The ubiquity and the durability.
Yeah,
it's basically knowing that everything can be properly connected up to an almost infinite bandwidth all the time.
Yeah.
It's not like when I go on holiday in the summer to East Anglia and I can't even get any fucking internet.
Yeah, but surely, I mean, 5G's kind of doing that to some extent. It's always supposed to be. I mean, maybe it's failed to deliver that. I don't know. Maybe that will be the thing that 5G didn't live up to the promise. Therefore, 6G's this. But
here's something a bit more substantial. A company called Cohere Technologies.
I know Cohere.
Yeah,
you too.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, they're pretty big in OpenRAN, actually. Cohere.
All right, and their chief scientific officer is called Dr. Ronnie Hadani, and he goes. He's keen on something called OTFS. I must have written what that stands for. Yes.
Is this involved in the Huawei stuff? He's been.
Well, this is. I put it in the Huawei story. He wasn't involved in the book. No.
Right.
But I think on the back of it, I think Cohere got in touch.
Yeah.
Going, if you're writing about this, you might want this comment. It's one of those speculative things, and I actually used it. And OTFS stands for Orthogonal Time, Frequency and Space.
Oh, yes, I saw this as well. It's like a successor to OFDM.
Which stands for Orthogonal Frequency Division Multiplexing.
Yeah.
I don't even know what orthogonal means.
Well, it's lots of shapes, isn't it, Scott?
Is that what it is?
Either. Don't ask me.
Yeah, orthogonal. It does sound like something geometric, doesn't it?
It sounds like some multi-sided
I know.
But
Frequency division multiplexing basically means multiplexing is getting a stream sort of going up and down in the same place or something like that, isn't it?
It's like multiple streams, I think.
Yeah.
Dense wave division multiplexing you had, didn't you? Which is putting several things on the same sort of light stream or something.
I mean, to put it into Scott language, it's basically clever ways of using a finite little bit of weight of frequency and getting maximum sort of utility out of it.
Yeah, we're going to get physicists writing into this saying,
I know,
you guys are a couple of
Jesus.
muppets, really,
Egypt.
honestly.
Yeah, well, we don't claim to be otherwise, so calm down. Anyway, and he goes, so in the email statement he goes, 4G and 5G are both based on orthogonal OFDM waveforms. However, 6G is going to require a waveform that offers better performance and supports extreme and high mobility scenarios. Extreme and, what is extreme? That's a bit general, isn't it? extreme. Well, like people like having a chat when they're jumping out of a plane or something.
Extreme sports.
Maybe it means the rock band.
Yeah. I was just listening to Do You Want to Play? That's one of the best guitar solos ever.
Betancourt?
Yeah. Amazing guitarist. A problem, and then he goes, high mobility scenarios, a problem identified by several standards bodies and forums. Subsequently, one of the first major specifications for 6G is likely to be that it uses this OFTS as the basis for a new waveform. OFTS's waveform is oblivious to distortion and can therefore offer much better performance and spectral efficiency. This will enable a whole range of high mobility use cases already being associated with 6G. So high mobility, extreme, all this stuff. I think it's just about it's about ubiquity and durability of being connected.
That sounds really dull.
Well, tell me about it.
I mean, I think,
believe me, I went and had a little look. I went and because I'd never heard of this shit before.
Yeah.
I went and Googled it and started getting these scientific papers. I nearly had to scratch my eyes out.
Do you know what the problem with all this is, though? Is that all that's really important, I'm sure, and to have that as and we'll need those things, no doubt, to support services in the future. But the problem is, from a network operator's perspective, they've tried to market these Gs as something that consumers and businesses need. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Google doesn't come out with a new service and go, oh, it's based on OFTS and you can put more.
Yes, well, obviously this isn't a bit of marketing copy.
No, I know, but that's the problem, though, isn't it? The Gs are becoming. It's very hard to. When 3G came along, it was marketed as the internet on your phone, yeah, and then it didn't work very well. So 4G became, well, actually now it's up and running and it's decent, yeah. I know Dean Bubley might disagree that 3G didn't work very well and you can use Uber.
Did he push back on your Uber?
He pushed back on my Uber thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even get internet pages when I'm on a 3G connection, so maybe he's in a better area than I am.
I couldn't get any Uber about 2:00 last Friday in the morning.
4G,
but that wasn't 4G's fault.
But I just think from a network operator's perspective, if one of the reasons that they're not doing that great is because they provide a technology rather than something that's actually an exciting. I mean, 3G was the opportunity, I guess, for them to do that. To say, look, you've got the internet on your phone, and if they marketed right, maybe, and things had worked out better, maybe they could have had some of those, those ridiculous ARPU projections about them basically doubling spend. Maybe it was never going to be as good as that, but maybe they could have done better from it than they did. But if it just becomes this sort of thing, how can you ever market something like that?
Well, that's why I'm trying to read into the bits where he says like a whole range of high mobility use cases. He's not being specific, but then maybe it falls to our imagination. What is a high mobility use case? Is it like at the end of last week, we took the piss out of those spy sunglasses? Is everyone walking around with heads-up displays all the time, and they've all got one earpiece in that's just feeding them all this information? There's all this talk, there's all this Neuralink, Elon Musk stuff about everyone turning into a fucking cyborg. Yeah. Personally, I don't fancy it. I think it's actually really healthy to be disconnected from technology every now and then and just go for a walk in the country.
Yeah, totally.
And do you want?
You and me both, but we're probably in the minority these days.
Well, and we're not getting any younger.
Apart from people that are younger than us,
maybe it's watching Netflix in the car on a highway at high speed.
Yeah, that's what we want. Well, I mean, of course, there is the autonomous vehicle side of things. So I just think it's ubiquitous connectivity, but that's quite a boring way of putting it.
Is that hard to do then? What? I've never tried to do that. Watch Netflix in a car at high speed.
But even having sometimes a phone.
Not so much it's hard. It's just it's likely to kill you.
Even
no, not if you're driving. I mean, if you're a passenger in the car.
Oh, right.
Sometimes even just having a phone call.
I didn't mean like watching The Walking Dead as you're driving.
I was just picturing this sort of heads-up display on the windscreen where the driver's sort of half focusing on.
No. Sometimes even having a phone call, if you're driving through,
No, because the cell hopping I've heard in the past, it can be awkward for high-speed services. But if you're a kid in the back of the car watching not The Walking Dead, but Disney on a tablet, is that a problem at 70 miles an hour on a motorway? I think it might be.
Because it fluctuates. If you look at your reception, like the bars and stuff, they move quite fast.
Yeah. They do. Especially once you get out of the southeast.
Exactly.
So anyway, we better move on. But I'm not sure what 6G is yet. Are you
even sure what 5G?
No one's sure.
No one's even sure what 5G is. Yeah.
I mean, you're not alone. Most people don't know what 6G is yet.
But what is interesting, and I completely get your point about technology versus actual sort of utility. What do we need it to be? What problems do we need it to solve? We're always told the big one about 5G is it solves this low latency problem, so you can have the robotic surgery and all that shit.
Yeah. And
that's fine. A lot of us didn't realise that was a problem. We're not sitting there where the doctor's about to operate on us. You go, can you just get a robot in?
Yeah. Well, it's solving problems that don't exist. Yeah.
Well,
but then I guess technology kind of does that.
I think it's solving problems for the operators, for sure.
By
5G, by giving them a more efficient technology, basically. But I don't think it's solving problems for consumers and businesses. I mean, maybe it will, but I don't think it is at the moment.
Well, I've got, hopefully I'm going to have a video chat with this guy, Andrea Donna from Vodafone. I was thinking, how am I going to chat to him?
I'm speaking to him just before you.
Oh, are you?
Not for video, but...
All right.
Well, I could do it on the video, I suppose.
Okay. Or you can ask him the proper questions. I just thought of being, benignly obnoxious and just going, 5G has been a bit of a fucking waste of time, hasn't it?
Well, that's a good thing to ask him for a video
exactly.
interview. Yeah.
Well, exactly. That's what
Brilliant.
I was thinking.
Yeah.
And, and ORAN, what's all the fuss about? Just basically being a bit of a prick about it.
Pitch it to me.
Yeah. I like that.
Yeah. So I think that's what I'll do.
Yeah.
But it, I'm not just making it up. I mean, we've gone about it loads of times.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't know, outside of certain little use cases like private networks, smart factories, that sort of thing, where you can have a really controlled environment where you can start utilizing some of this higher frequency stuff, and where maybe there's the need for all this extra bandwidth and low latency. And
well, a factory is a fixed thing. Wouldn't they have fiber?
Well, no, but you still need plenty of wireless going on. Not everything. I mean, in an ideal world, everything would be wireless, wouldn't it? If you could have it so you didn't even need fiber, so that your computer just connected to the internet wherever, you didn't need to worry about Wi-Fi hotspots. You didn't need to even think about it. It was just perma-connected. Then and people didn't need to think about infrastructure, let alone SSIDs and passwords and things like that.
Do you know what I think a good question for him is? On the sort of ORAN issue. Is why take the risk?
Well, I'll tell you what, because we're about to talk.
Yeah, go on.
Well, we're about to talk about ORAN, so why don't you keep your powder dry on that one? And that's a good opportunity to move it on anyway, because we've only got about half an hour or so left. So anyway, that was that. Lots of people read that. I think my summary is I'm always fine with whenever Huawei is defiant and fights back. I'm like, yeah, good. If I was in Huawei's position, that's what I'd do.
Yeah,
I'd much rather that than they just threw in the towel.
Yeah.
As I've said loads of times on this pod, my mind is not made up on how compromised Huawei is by the Chinese state. I certainly haven't been presented with any hard evidence of it. That doesn't mean they're innocent. I'm just saying it's hard to come down hard one way or the other. And so they should keep fighting. And the Chinese attitude, I think, is just like, all right then, balkanise, we'll split and we'll beat you. So suck on that.
Yeah.
And I'm not necessarily betting against them.
Well, neither is Ericsson's CEO either. So that's the concern if it all goes totally fragmented.
Quite. We chatted about that last week or before.
Yeah.
And, by the sounds of it, they got millions of people getting amazing educations and, they've got a real sort of work hard culture anyway.
Yeah.
In fact, I think Xi Jinping's even had to say, can you take it down a notch? There's people just burning out.
Yeah.
So yes, on R&D, I suspect they'll never be quite as good as the sort of softer stuff as like the Americans, like marketing and branding.
No.
But in terms of raw R&D and development in general, there's no reason to believe they won't kick ass.
There's a semiconductor analyst that I speak to sometimes called Earl Lum, who he's got his own company, but he's like really smart. I mean, he's sometimes quoted in the Wall Street Journal. Knows his stuff, knows all the companies, and he had a really good quote. I remember last year when I spoke to him, he said, "In a market of 1 billion people, it doesn't matter that not everybody's an Einstein. One of them will be."
Yes,
it's the same thing with sport. There's a reason Iceland never produces top class football players because there's only 250,000 people.
It's kind of amazing.
All there is in Iceland.
No, like 300, but it's still amazing.
Oh, 300,000. Sorry,
but what they can achieve with this few people, it's amazing.
What can they achieve?
Beat England at the Euros.
They got Iding Johnson. Yeah, that was a fluke.
Your boys took a hell of a beating. That was Norway, wasn't it? Okay, so let's move it on. I'm going to hand the ball straight to you, Ian.
Yeah.
Tell us. So, just to frame it, just to remind what we talked about at the start, but there's this sort of one of the bodies that is in charge of developing the OpenRAN technology is called ORAN Alliance. Nokia's,
well, it's the body, really.
Is it? It's pretty much the only one. Okay, because there
all
was
the
a bit of fragmentation. Wasn't there?
Well, they aligned their activities with TIP, which is the Facebook-led telecom.
That's the main event.
They're the
then.
specifications group.
Right.
They'd like to think of themselves as a standards body.
But they haven't quite got there yet, which is part of what you're about to get into.
Yeah.
Anyway, Nokia's part of it. They're to bail because they're shitting themselves about getting sanctioned by the Americans for coexisting with Chinese people. Which again, I think is excessive. You can't just have a policy saying you can't talk to people from a fucking country. It's ridiculous. But anyway, and then they came back. So I'll hand it over to you to tell us how that happened.
Well, they came back. I mean, I think the whole way this thing's been made out from, emails I've had, and Mike wrote a story as well. The way this whole thing's been interpreted by some parts of the OpenRAN community has been quite odd to me. And so, for instance, Mike spoke with Dell, who are a member of the ORAN Alliance. They're a contributor as well. But, what is Dell? It's a company. What's Dell's background in telecom?
Well, it didn't have one in the past, but it's getting more involved now with ORAN and stuff going on. It could be because
it's getting more involved for sure. But who do you think contributes most of the intellectual property to the OpenRAN Alliance? Is it someone like Dell, or is it people who actually know about telecom?
Yeah, you'd imagine the big kit
and
vendors.
Therefore, the people who are frankly taking all the risks really in the OpenRAN Alliance are, if you're the reason this was a worry for Nokia clearly was because you're in a group like that, you're sharing. If it works the same way as the 3GPP and ETSI and all those standards bodies, and that's how they'd like to see themselves, then what they're basically doing is pooling intellectual property, to create specifications.
Yeah.
And therefore that essentially means you're pooling it with, because some of the members are Chinese, and some of those members are on the entity list.
Well, and a piece of technology can't be approved as part of the specification without knowing what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, so
it has to be shared.
They're
that's the whole point.
They're sharing technology among themselves in a club that has members who are Chinese companies on the entity list.
Yeah,
and I totally understand why Nokia would be concerned about that, because from what I've heard, it happened. It certainly insists it's one of the biggest contributors, and I've heard from other sources that it is one of the biggest contributors. Okay. And it makes sense that it would be one of the biggest contributors because, quite frankly, all the stuff that ORAN's trying to change to do with making front haul interfaces, for instance, more open, well, all the stuff that was in those front haul interfaces in the first place all comes from Nokia and Ericsson. And
Nokia
companies.
Was a bit less, it dragged his feet a bit less than Ericsson, didn't it?
Nokia definitely dragged its feet less than Ericsson, I think. I think that's fair. They were right there from the start. They were in the group that was... Right. There were two. There's no surprise. There's loads of Chinese companies in the ORAN Alliance because it was actually formed from the merger of two other groups. One of them mainly American, but had Nokia in it, called the XRAN Forum, and one was called the CRAN Alliance, which is basically controlled by China Mobile. Right. And they came together in 2018.
Guess that's what the C stands for.
CRAN, yeah. So they came in.
China.
Well, I think it was Cloud RAN. I think the CRAN Alliance.
Not China RAN.
It wasn't China RAN. But they came together in 2018 to form the ORAN. Something that you could probably not see happening very easily these days. Actually, to form a new group like that with all these Chinese members and China Mobile having such a prominent role. But they came together in 2018, and it doesn't surprise me Nokia was concerned. I mean, the odd thing is that the whole thing's been resolved pretty quickly. They're back in it now. After a week of being out, of pausing technical activity, basically, they rejoined after the OpenRAN Alliance made certain changes that apparently have satisfied the US lawmakers that it's all compliant, and that companies aren't going to infringe. And I think the real worry for Nokia was. It's sharing of American expertise with Chinese companies. So in Nokia's case, it's got American employees. It's obviously got Bell Labs there. It's a former American company, partly Lucent, and it has a huge number of staff in the US. So it's a big contributor. So it was. If there was any company that was going to be really worried, actually, it was probably going to be Nokia in that group. It was always going to be the one that was most at risk, let's say, of sanctions. And what the OpenRAN Alliance has done is to make changes that apparently have satisfied US lawmakers.
Yeah, so you say apparently, and I know I'm butting in because I know you've got plenty more to add on this, but let me just say one thing just to set you up.
Yeah.
So when I wrote about it at the start of the week, this is before the stuff that you're about to talk about came out, and I actually didn't know you published it. You only just told me a minute ago. I haven't been paying enough attention to your great work. But I said, what's not at all clear from any of the announcements is what changes were necessary for Nokia's commitment to stop wavering. That's me taking the piss a little bit because Tommy Wheato put this thing up stressing their unwavering commitment. It wavered a bit, didn't it, mate?
Yeah.
It's not unwavering because it just fucking wavered a minute ago.
But it wasn't clear, but you were right to say that because they're so opaque.
And my speculation, before I hand it back to you, was I said maybe there weren't any at all, and they just had a word with the US authorities to get them to back off a bit.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you've got some substance because you actually, while they get very little detail, you got hold of some more stuff.
I pressed the ORAN Alliance for more information on what the changes were, basically. That have apparently satisfied Nokia and satisfied US lawmakers, because Nokia would not just return without getting some kind of assurance, from its law team.
Yeah, they're not just going to go, don't worry about it.
They're not just going to go, okay, that's all right, ORAN Alliance. They get some kind of feed. And I didn't get anything from the ORAN Alliance, but I did manage to get hold of the email that was sent to about all the changes to ORAN Alliance participants, which is strictly confidential and not to be distributed outside the So I'm going to read it. So this
what
is
happened? Might you get in trouble? Are you going to get?
So the first part is, dear ORAN Alliance, dear ORAN member and participants. Some ORAN participants have been limiting contributions at ORAN technical work because of potential concerns around US trade law and the US entity list. The US BIS entity list is part of the US export regulation. It identifies entities and other persons believed to be involved, blah, blah, blah. I'll skip that bit. So this is interesting. As a German association, ORAN Alliance is not obliged by US regulation. Well, that's slightly irrelevant, actually, because it doesn't matter whether you're a German association or not. If there are US companies in or companies with US
they'll
technology,
find a way of getting to you.
It's the same thing as the TSMC issue.
It's a globalised economy,
company, but it still had to... ORAN Alliance is open and neutral to all companies willing to join and does not limit or exclude any interested company. Well, that's interesting as well, because one potential solution to this was to try and find some way of kicking out the entity list companies, which are three fairly small. I think it's only two, actually. And it might even now.
So Huawei and
one.
ZTE are not in the ORAN Alliance?
Huawei's opposed to OpenRAN, so they're not.
Oh, that's just their hard and fast
in the OpenRAN Alliance, but they're not on the entity list.
Ah, okay, all right.
Which is also a contradiction in US policy, but...
well, that's because they already had their bottom spanked and they promised to be good from now on. So now they're not on the entity list.
Sure, but the reason that Huawei's on the entity list is because it's a concern because it's linked to the Chinese government.
Well, that's not the stated reason, is it? The stated reason is,
that's the reason Huawei's on the entity list.
It's
not because it's done stuff in Iran.
Yeah, you're right. No, I'll shut up. You're right.
But so that's the other thing. And then this is the interesting thing. So this is about the changes. However, ORAN Alliance members, contributors and academic contributors need to be aware of US export regulations if they're in scope of US export regulations. So these are the changes. In reaction to the situation, the ORAN Alliance Board of Directors has agreed to change ORAN operating procedures so that ORAN companies which are in scope of US export regulation are satisfied that their contributions will be made in compliance with US regulations. The board, and then blah, blah, there's a bit of waffle. But basically, these changes generally involve making future technical contributions non-confidential. But the nature of these changes cannot be summarised in a single phrase.
So non-confidential's the critical bit so far?
That's the critical bit. So basically, and then there's a little bit more about the changes to working groups where they've said, so from now on, any contributions that come in... go into this. So here it is. Effective on September the 13th, 2021, so that's this week, all new contributions containing technical information shall be uploaded to the non-confidential contributions directory. This will facilitate implementing potential procedural changes that are currently under consideration.
So it's a transparency thing?
It's a transparency thing.
So the Americans were worried that there was shit going on that they couldn't see.
Well,
that might have involved some transfer of American intellectual property.
I mean, they've done this, and as I've heard, the people who are responsible for the entity list stuff are that this is okay, this is good enough. But I don't think it's the end of the affair, because I think what you're going to get now is US hardliners, and there are lots of them, saying, "Hang on a minute, really? is a change like that good enough? I mean, I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but one of the the ORAN Alliance likes to think there's a massive contradiction here, because the 3GPP as Huawei's involved in that, and Huawei's on the entity
and no one's
list,
moaning about
and
it.
Ericsson's in the 3GPP clearly, and Nokia, and no one says anything. The difference between the ORAN Alliance and the 3GPP is that the 3GPP is a proper standards body. It's very, very open and transparent.
Yep, you can go on the website and see all their little geeky documents.
And you don't, and this is I think the sticking point. It's not just about making these contributions non-confidential. One of the things that upsets the European Commission, apparently, there's a big report that came out last month by the European Commission on ORAN Alliance non-compliance with WTO criteria for what a standards body should be. And one of those things is that the founder members of the ORAN Alliance have a veto. They can block anything.
Right.
And the founder members are AT&T, Deutsche Telekom, China Mobile, which is basically the Chinese government,
and
NTT Docomo and Orange. 5 companies, 5 operators have a block on anything that they don't like in the ORAN Alliance. That is not how a standards body works according to the WTO.
It's more consensual.
And the European Commission went in its report last month, hang on a minute, this doesn't sound right, this needs further investigation.
Even though I might have lost track, at least 2 of the companies are European, aren't they? DT and Orange, yeah?
Well, they are, but it doesn't matter where they're from. You don't, a veto is not how a standards body works according to WTO criteria.
Funny that the EU says that, because that's how the EU works.
Well, the 3GPP, the standards body that the WTO approves, don't work that way.
Right,
and that was what the European Commission, I mean, okay, maybe there's EU stuff.
I know, it's just me having a pop, as I do.
But that was their concern. And if they're concerned that way, I cannot imagine that US politicians who are very sort of anti-Chinese and probably upset by this whole, I mean, there's actually been some of them tweeting about the whole thing, are going to let this lie. So I'm not sure this is the end of it. I think this could kind of blow up. But that clearly, that memo is confirmation, because I've been asking them repeatedly, the ORAN Alliance, and they haven't responded to any messages. Has the veto gone? Has that been relinquished by those 5 founder members, or hasn't it? And that email, there's no mention of that at all.
So, in other words, what you take from that is it's still there. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. That's certainly a hell of a lot more information than was made public otherwise.
Well, they don't. And this is the whole irony, isn't it? That they're supposed to be transparent, yet you can't even get a straight answer. I mean, if you ever wrote to the 3GPP and asked something, I've always had very quick responses.
Right. Yeah, because it's an ethos, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's an ethos of public service. It's an ethos of being, if you are totally transparent, then you conduct yourself in a certain way. I think this is part of the problem. If the whole thing's set up, like, I don't know about you, I've got to the stage now where anyone who's listening to the podcast knows how I talk.
Yeah,
it's fairly unfiltered. But I got to a stage where I won't commit anything to email, anything even to sort of instant message, beyond like a group I'm in with my mates on Signal where we sort of banter. I'm quite guarded, but then if I'm in the pub and I think perhaps naively I'm not being recorded, then I'll talk proper Scotch shite.
Yeah.
And I think if you're in an organisation where transparency is just baked in, then you just naturally assume everything you're going to... Like, people who keep getting cancelled on Twitter, they still haven't understood that when they put something on Twitter, they're publishing it to the whole world. And then they get all surprised when the whole world freaks out and takes stuff out of context. I hardly ever put anything up on Twitter knowing what I'm like.
Yeah.
And so 3GPP, they will know everything they do that's 3GPP sanctioned is going to end up getting published.
Yeah.
So they'll conduct themselves in a certain way.
It's all non-discriminatory. It's all one vote per one company. It's no veto.
Yeah.
And I applaud all that.
Totally.
I don't
if
like.
If you're going to be a standards body, you've got to be.
I think it's a totally valid. And I'll tell you the other interesting about this. I mean, there's a lot of vested interest in this whole ORAN debate. Yeah, there's a lot of people who are very pro it. There's a lot of people who are very against it.
Especially since the Yanks politicised it.
And one source I have who didn't have anything to do with that memo, so I'm quite happy to mention him actually. John Strand, we've mentioned him a few times. He's very, very sort of agitated about this issue, and he's quite opposed to this.
Some of your coverage. I actually linked through to one of your write up before the one where you mentioned the memo, and you had a bit of Strand action at the end of that.
But he's the kind of person you might imagine, because he's quite anti Chinese, I think.
Yeah.
Chinese government, John.
Yeah, Chinese politically.
He's quite anti-Chinese politically. He's the kind of person you might imagine would say something like, well, I think the 3GPP is probably an organisation that is going to have to change or not exist in the future because we need to have standards groups that don't have Chinese companies in them. And he's not at all that. I mean, he thinks that his line is we need to find ways of working with the Chinese, but we have to do it through organisations that adhere to.
And that's what the Americans have got to get up to speed on. I mean, I actually genuinely hope, because this AUKUS thing I alluded to earlier, where the nuclear submarines in Australia and all that sort of thing, and the Chinese have been freaking out about it. Some of it directly, some of it through like Global Times. I didn't read it earlier, I won't go back to it, but there's some Global Times editorials just talking about Chinese, Australian people being the first to die in the South China Sea. I mean, they've really fucking gone for it.
Yeah.
And it's all a little bit hysterical, if I'm honest, at this stage.
But
you can see, like, we're making allusions earlier to the 1930s. It might be hysterical at this stage, but I don't think it's completely hysterical to extrapolate.
Well, the Pentagon's war planning assumes China will make an invasion for Taiwan within the next 5 years. They think. If you look at all the movements and everything that's happening, you can extrapolate. You can sort of do.
Oh yeah, and the rhetoric.
You can do Isaac Asimov type maths.
No, and the rhetoric, and they're constantly saying Taiwan is part of China, and
so they're expecting it within the next.
I know,
5 years.
and then we had all these people going. One person really cut to the chase when we had all the Afghanistan stuff, and they just went, who's really hating this Afghanistan shit? Taiwan. Because it was basically a big statement of sort of geopolitical weakness by America.
It is,
and that's fine. That's not to say they couldn't still. I'm still pretty confident that there'll never be a hot war between the US and China, but the US can still take care of itself in a proper hot war.
I think if it comes within 5 years, and by that stage, and this is maybe one of the reasons we should be happy about the kind of semiconductor protectionism and Intel building fabs in Europe for 80 billion and trying to do the same there's skepticism whether it can catch up with TSMC. I know in the analyst community they always think that
I share that skepticism.
There's a lot
it's really hard.
It's really
to do this
hard.
Stuff.
Yeah, I think people
Intel itself was dropping the ball. And it used to be
Gelsinger had to do a webinar a few weeks ago actually, where analysts were asking him about the ability to do that, and he sounds very convincing. Credit to him, but it's a hard thing to do.
Well, they fucked something up. I know, like reading people like Charlie at Semi Accurate, who used to be at the Inquirer. He's basically monomaniacal about the sort of chip sector.
Yeah.
Granted, he's this kind of writer who's got a few chips on his shoulder and quite takes pleasure out of knocking them down a peg or two. That doesn't mean he's wrong.
Yeah.
And he's really enjoyed Intel fucking up on. Like, I think they missed a whole process basically.
Yeah, they're
catastrophic.
I think they're on 10 nanometers.
Yeah, there we go. But I also know, like from my previous life being at Hexus and stuff, I went and visited a fab when this company called Global Foundries was created, which was spun off from when AMD still had its fabs. It flogged its fabs. Which Intel's linked
to buying at the moment. Apparently.
Oh, is it? It's linked with buying Global Foundries? Yeah, well, I wouldn't be surprised. That's probably part of their 10 bill or whatever it is. No, it's 3 bill, 10 fabs. Anyway.
Yeah, it's 80 billion.
80 billion.
About in Europe and 10 fabs.
Yeah, well, I actually visited...
you still think, where's all the money coming from? Because it sounds like huge...
I know, it's funny how they suddenly dug some up, isn't it? This is what I mean.
I know there's US support, actually, isn't there?
Well, that's exactly... This is what I mean about everyone else looking at China and thinking, well, if we can't beat them, join them. I think the US is going in a China direction.
I did write about this 80 billion thing. I wrote a story a couple of weeks ago, last week, I think, when he said it. And one thing I didn't do in that story, which I sometimes do, is a deep dive on the balance sheet and the finances and, where's the money coming from kind of thing. But I don't know. Maybe 80 billion over a period of whatever it is for Intel is conceivable.
Well, they probably haven't got the cash directly from the American government, but they will have got some kind of reassurance or underwriting that says, if you dig up 80 bill and splash it on new fabs, you won't regret it. You won't regret it.
Yeah.
That's how these things tend to work. But one thing I just want, before I finish this one off, I actually think, like, talking about standards bodies, talking about 6G, talking about all the chips and stuff, there's a fair bit of saber rattling going on. It's probably going to ramp up. China keeps flying jets over Taiwan and shit like that. And, the problem with that sort of thing is saber rattling can turn into saber fighting
Yeah.
real quick, and all it takes is one fuck up.
Yeah.
Like one jet accidentally shoots down a civilian aircraft or something like that, and then everything just goes mental. Well, it happens. It does happen, mate. Jesus Christ, Russia's done it a few times.
Yeah, have they?
In fact, talking about Russia, we're going to get on. Yeah, they have.
They shot down a passenger jet over Ukraine, didn't they?
Yeah.
Oh,
It does happen. I'm not saying it happens every day.
They shot down a passenger jet with a load of Europeans in.
But it's
over
only got to
Ukraine.
happen once. Anyway.
And they abduct, and the Belarusians.
And then they made one land just so they could nick some gobby bloke.
Wait, which is Belarus, which is basically Russia, yeah?
Yeah, well, it's certainly.
Let's be honest.
It's basically
Alexander Lukashenko is
I think-
basically Putin's little.
I think Belarus to
stooge.
Russia is what North Korea is to China. It's like a sort of satellite
I think it might be closer
puppet
than
state.
that.
No, but in
An
terms of the
outpost.
geopolitical. Anyway, but what I'm hoping is actually the thing that we write and talk about, the tech sector, will be what pulls them back from the brink. It'll be this need to. By the way, if you're wondering why I'm distracted, Ian's making a tower of punk tins, and they're going to fall over. He's going to pan round. He's actually panning round to it. Okay,
It's
not very professional, is
the
it?
happiest tower in the world.
Not very professional audience. Just as I'm about to make some profound point as well. Thanks a fucking lot. I actually think the need, the fact that technology is globalized, the fact that generations of mobile technology require global cooperation. I'm hoping stuff like that will make everyone go, all right, we're still gonna snarl at each other, but behind the scenes, we're just gonna keep it under control because it's just in everyone's interest.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping. But you never know with these
fingers crossed.
egomaniac pricks who are in charge of everything.
Yeah.
If they just feel butthurt one day, they'll just send the lads in, just to show that they're tougher than everyone else. That's the problem. You're dealing with human frailties and human ego. If it was rational, everyone would just go, look, we're all making a ton of cash here. Let's just calm down. Anyway. So actually, that kind of leads on to, we were just mentioning Russia. The thing I was just writing about just before we started, and there's some other little bits and bobs. What was the headline? What's that? Is my mic cut off?
No, it's just any interferences.
Oh right. My
Maybe it's
phone's
the
still in my
laptop.
pocket. Maybe it's the laptop. The headline is Apple and Google forced to delete Russian opposition app ahead of election. I didn't even proof it at all before I put it up, so it's probably a complete mess. But basically, there's this Russia's about to have a general election. And I didn't get a chance to Google it. Maybe I can do it now. How long Putin's been in charge? But he's been in charge for a good old while, hasn't he?
Well, he had a little bit of time off when his name came in. But
well, he just put a puppet in, didn't he?
He was basically still in charge anyway, was he? In fact, he was Prime Minister then, wasn't he, anyway?
Exactly.
So it wasn't like he...
Here we are. Look, this is Wikipedia.
what's his name? Name begins with M. Almost like Medvedev, but not I'm thinking of the US Open.
Yeah,
tennis
we'll
player,
get to him. He goes, he's current president of Russia since 2012. So this current stint is 9 years. And then prior to that, it was 99 till 2008. So he had
and a little bit in between.
He had another
was his
9
puppet.
years.
Yeah.
And so he had 4 years of pretending some other bloke was in charge so that he could get round
But it's basically
law.
been since 90... When was the first time started?
99.
So he's been in charge since 99, basically.
Right, it's 22 years, as you say, Pierre. And, it's funny how no one gets to 22 years and goes, yeah, that was good. I think I'll call it a day now and do some fishing.
Yeah.
It never fucking works out that way, does it, with these despotic types?
No. You have to take them down or they shoot themselves in a bunker somewhere.
Yeah, or you have to do some crazy sort of Gaddafi type of stuff.
I'll do some
or
judo
Saddam
now.
Hussein stuff.
Yeah.
And there's about to be another election. Now, I don't think anyone thinks Russian elections are totally fair. At least Putin has the decency to not do stuff like, I don't know, people like Mugabe used to do and get like 98% of the vote.
No, because he's too clever.
Yeah.
He realises that's a dumb thing to do, so you change it to make it 87% of the vote.
And then everyone's like, well, that's a strong opposition, that 13% right there. But I think he's shitting it a little bit because there's this guy called Alexei Navalny who he tried to poison. Well, actually, I don't know he tried to poison. Someone, could have been anyone, could have been you, Ian, tried to poison him. But he's an outspoken
they
critic.
did poison him, just didn't kill him.
Sorry, sorry. Tried to kill him, did poison him. You're right. And then
Certainly would have been me.
and this Navalny's taking one for the team, and he flew back into Russia anyway, despite knowing there was a price on his head. And now he's apparently chopping some wood over in Siberia. But his
He'd
team
obviously never read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich.
Right, nor have I.
just thought-
Or the Gulag Archipelago, or all that stuff.
He
Oh,
wasn't
is that
up on
one?
his-
That's the one you're talking about, the shorter Solzhenitsyn one?
Yeah, it's Solzhenitsyn.
Yeah, I heard about that.
He did Cancer Ward, Gulag Archipelago.
But the one that you just described, I've heard is a
it's
good
only
like primer
60 pages or
primer
something.
into it.
Yeah.
And it's one day in a gulag, isn't it?
Yeah.
When was
Hardcore.
he taken there? Because I don't think he's spent a winter there yet.
No, this is all quite recent. I mean, I don't know. I'd have to go through the whole.
UCOS guy who was in. Is he still in? He must still be in. UCOS.
Well, some people have played it right. Like the lad who owns Chelsea, he's managed to not get
he's
not
on the
get
right side of it
poisoned.
so far.
Yeah, he's played it right. But anyone who doesn't play it right ends up with nuclear isotopes up their arse.
Yeah.
No, they have a car crash.
No, they come over.
Or
They come and live in Chelsea, and have expensive tennis lessons, and then never go back to Russia ever again.
Well, that's the smart move.
I know a few of them actually.
Right. Yes, I imagine.
Not well, but I know of them.
Right. Is that because your son's handy at tennis? You told me your son played cards with Emma Raducanu.
Raducanu, yeah.
I know, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It must wreck his head to see her like all over the
I
telly
think
and
she's
stuff.
great. Yeah.
Oh, I think she's brilliant. But I'm just imagining Rafa's, like his mate, suddenly this global superstar. It must be a weird transition.
They're not super friendly or anything.
No, but they've bumped into each
They've been
other.
in competitions before, and
No,
but
I think she's
he
brilliant.
thought it was slightly surreal. I think.
Yeah, I bet. That's
Yeah.
Well, I'll be in one day.
Well, I don't know.
And then
about that,
and then we
but,
can go to the Met Ball.
Yeah.
What do you
I've
wear
always
if
wanted
you go to the Met Ball?
I'm
Met
definitely going to
Gala.
wear a big white dress with "Tax the Rich" written on the back of it.
I'm going to just put a massive pair of tights over my whole body. Isn't that what Kim Kardashian did? Just to show off my amazing physique. Okay.
I think people would love that.
Yes. Well, it's a niche thing. Cutting long story short, there's all this weird shit going on in Russia. There's an election, I think it's running today. No one expects anyone other than Putin to win, but he's obviously shitting it a little bit because Navalny and his team have come up with this app that I haven't really looked into it, but in some way it helped coordinate tactical voting.
Yeah.
So there will be Russians. I don't think Russia's quite as locked down as China in a lot of ways. So there will be Russians who are not happy with Putin and want to do something about it. And the secret police haven't quite got round to knocking on their door going, you might want to rethink.
They just don't have the technology sophistication.
Right. So this app's come up. And apparently the reason this is relevant to mobile is obviously the app is on one of iOS or Android.
Yeah.
And the Russian state, by which we can assume Putin and his proxies, have been hassling Apple and Google to get this app off because they don't like the danger, the electoral danger it presents. And they've generally, I think, pushed back. But then just today, sort of trending on things like Tech Meme, is that they've taken the thing down. And the reason they're taking the thing down is basically the Russian state threatened them.
Yeah.
Threatened their country managers with joining Navalny over in the fucking log chopping.
Yeah, you don't want that.
And I was looking at some of the reactions. Some people who are going, this out of you're assisting a sort of totalitarian, all that sort of thing. But I actually think in this particular case, it's not obvious to me what and I'll diss Apple and Google. And I think they've done some awful, like the electoral meddling in the States over suppressing the Hunter Biden story.
Yeah.
At the end of last year, which clearly would have been electorally harmful to Biden, who they clearly favour, because everyone knows Silicon Valley's pro-Democrat.
Yeah.
That's just, it's the most egregious electoral meddling, as far as I'm concerned. Or perhaps not the most, because even more is someone going, get rid of this thing that's a threat to me or I'll lock you up. But I don't see what they could have done. So, I mean, my point of that tangent is I will call them out, I'll hassle them.
Yeah, other than to be martyrs and accept that their country managers are going to go and join, our mate Navalny chopping logs, then which is I go along with you on that one. I think it's easy to say they should be principled and not do it, but they have to abide by the laws. I mean, no one makes a fuss, do they, about the fact that Google and some of the other social media companies can't operate in China. They just say, well, they're not allowed to do it. They're not allowed to operate in China properly.
Well, there was a little fuss a little while ago about Google had something, I think it's called Project Raven or something like that, which is a special version of Google that complied with all the sort of Chinese firewall censorship stuff. And you know how most of these Silicon Valley companies have got this sort of activist staff base that like to kick off every now and then.
Yeah.
And so they got some hassle about that. But in this particular case, I've always thought, like, I hate censorship. I'll go on about AWS getting rid of Parler and all that sort of thing. But to me, there has to be some moderation.
Yeah.
And to me, the threshold is always law.
Yeah.
So big tech shouldn't be using its own discretion to censor, but it should adhere to the law. And if it just so happens that Russian law, however moodily it's come about, says this is against the law, then they've got to comply.
Yeah, I mean, I don't agree with the Russian law, but they have to comply with it.
And the reason I bring it up, and we've only got a few minutes left, is to talk about how I think this is an increasing, like in China, they've got all kinds of stuff going on. Like Pierre, you were just remembering, there's this, recently there was a story in Wall Street Journal.
Zhao, I think is her name.
Right. There's a super like mega actress who's not only a really well-known actress, but she's one of these people that's really smart and has got involved in production and other bits of business.
Investing in Alibaba.
Just generally a sort of kick-ass person. And apparently she's just been erased from the entirety of Chinese internet.
Right.
You just if you like Googled her or Baidu'd her or whatever the fuck you can do over there.
Nothing shows up.
Nothing comes up. And we've had this thing going on for a while where Xi Jinping's been coming down hard on big tech in China. So like a year ago or something, Jack Ma went walkabouts for a while, the head of Alibaba.
He went to chop some logs until he learned.
Yeah, and then he came back and he was suddenly going, do you know what? I've realised how great the Chinese Communist Party is.
Yeah.
Donate some money.
Yeah,
having these balls stamped on.
Exactly. Having given it a bit of thought and wanting to keep my balls, I've decided that the CCP is just arguably the best communist party in the world.
Marvellous is what it is.
And this is happening to other people. There's this thing where all these big techs like Tencent and Baidu and Alibaba are all suddenly chipping into this redistribution fund. And basically, Xi Jinping, to be fair to the bloke, seems to be playing a blinder of retrospectively shackling all this big tech and going, let's not forget who's really wearing the trousers around here.
Yeah.
Let's not forget communism.
He's the daddy.
Yeah.
But that's a weird thing, isn't it? They call it communism with Chinese characteristics. They've got this real gift for sort of weird
So it's
euphemism.
basically not communism at all. It's just a one-party state with like...
Well, what it is it's capitalism with a ceiling. So you go for it. You go and sell loads of stuff. You go and make loads of money. I mean, was it on the pod I did my sort of shitty Marlon Brando impression?
Yeah.
You know, where he goes, someday, and that day may never happen, I will come to you for a favour. That's basically what he's doing. He's going, you make loads of money, but one day I'm going to come knocking on your door, and if you don't want to be going off and hang out in Navalny, you better fucking do what you're told. And he seems to be doing that really well. Mm-hmm. And I suspect, I mean, this is just conjecture, this actress suddenly being erased from the internet is another manifestation of that. He's basically finding anyone who's got a lot of power and influence. I mean, there's this superficial stuff where they're going, we're worried about people being addicted to computer games, we're worried about people being unproductive because they're just watching telly the whole time or whatever.
And she wasn't like taken or anything like this. Like she was seen.
Yeah, apparently.
Apparently
she's hanging around the phone
at
shop.
a Chinese carrier event.
She was taken?
No, she wasn't.
Oh.
So, yeah.
It wasn't like Jack Ma.
I was
What's going on?
Visions of Liam Neeson going in to rescue her then.
Yeah.
So saying to Xi, I will find you.
Good luck.
I will kill you.
Yeah, I want to do like a Family Guy Liam Neeson voice.
Did they do him?
Well, actually, I think they get Liam Neeson to do it, so it's not like it's an impression. Yeah, I mean, just to sum it up, we've got this stuff going on with Russia, we've got this stuff going on with China, and we sort of expect it of them in maybe a slightly xenophobic, well, they're all sort of despotic, authoritarian regimes anyway.
Yeah.
But what concerns me...
I don't think it's xenophobic, they just are.
Well, yeah, they do seem to be. I don't think it's just me being a dick.
I mean, if the Spanish were doing it, I'd be equally critical of the Spanish, but they don't.
But that's the point I want to conclude on. I think I'm worried the West is starting to look at places like China and Russia and thinking they might be onto something there. The way we'll do it in the West is more through like antitrust. And a lot of the antitrust pressure on big tech is quite justified because,
Yeah.
but we let them get that big. They didn't do it through dodgy means.
Well, the antitrust thing's too late almost in the.
Yeah, but this is what Xi Jinping's done. This is this ceiling he's put on his on capitalism. He's gone, okay, you made loads of money. Now I want some of it.
Yeah, I mean the trouble is that it's not transparent, is it? It's not done in a proper.
But I don't think it's done properly in the West. I think we'll get antitrust, but I suspect, and I don't have any proof of this, that what's going on behind the scenes is they're going, right, well, we got you banged to rights and antitrust. However, we can make it go away if you collaborate with the state more.
Well,
this is what I'm worried about.
That is happening. That's very worrying. But I certainly agree with regulation of internet companies in the US in terms. I mean, that's something we talk about all the time, like public cloud being too big for its boots, kind of thing, and what effects could that create?
And social media affecting elections.
Totally right
and
for
so
governments to look into that. I just think it needs to be done in the right way.
Well, that's my concern. I agree with you.
Yeah.
My concern is that the state has become so pragmatic and so cynical that it's not actually going to follow through on the antitrust stuff. It's just using it as a bargaining chip to get big tech to cooperate with the state more.
Yeah, maybe.
And the big loser, if big tech and the state are cooperating with each other, the big loser is everyone else.
Yeah.
Right, we're at a time where Pierre's got to do other stuff, so I better wrap it up. Cool. All right. Thanks for watching, and make sure you join us for the next one.